Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 3 of Beyond the Crease, a Grassroots Cricket original podcast. I'm your host, Behram Qazi, and today I have two guests with me as opposed to the usual one. Of course, we have our regular, Mr. Ali Khan, who is the former general manager of the Jamaica Talawas. Ali, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Behram. How are you?
Perfect. And next up, we have Hijab Zahid, who was a top three contestant in Pepsi Voice of Pakistan 2022, and she is a fellow cricket aficionado. Hijab, doing well today?
Doing wonderful today. Thank you so much for asking.
Love to hear it. And today's activity, rather than topic, I would say, is that Ali, Hijab, and myself will be combining to create an all time Pakistan Test 11. We will be debating each position from 1 to 12, and we will be voting on each potential candidate for every position. Of course, each candidate would require 2 out of 3 votes to make it in the team. So, Ali, you can answer first, and then Hijab, you can go after. How do you guys feel coming into this episode and this podcast, and what were your general thoughts?
Yeah, I think I've been wanting to do something like this for some time to kind of put into context kind of the historical perspective of Pakistan cricket. There's a lot of, there are different eras. You have the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and obviously today. And, we've had, so many great players play for Pakistan and a lot of players that were great but never actually got to play. Putting all that into historical context I think it's an interesting exercise and it's a necessary exercise. So I'm happy to be a part of it.
So this was very interesting to me because I had to do a bit of a research as well because I am a bit new, as you can say. Like I wasn't here in the 80s and the early 90s to watch cricket and watch the greats of Pakistan live. So I had to do a little bit of research. I mean, I know basically who are the greats, but obviously we had to choose those 12 people. All time Pakistan, it's a very, very hard task to do. But I'm hoping that we can just, put our brains together and come up with a team that I think majority would agree with.
Likewise, Hijab, I mean, I also started watching cricket religiously from 2002, 2003. So most of these players, I haven't really watched them in their pomp. But I guess let's kick things off. I'll start with my candidate for position number 1, the opening slot. And I feel like this is a fairly obvious one. Saeed Anwar, arguably one of the most stylish and flamboyant left-handers to play for Pakistan across formats. And he actually averages 45.5 in 55 test matches in test cricket and has over 4,000 runs. He averages 50 in Asia and 49.36 in Australia and New Zealand, which I thought was a fun fact. And I want to ask you guys, I mean, we always talk about Saeed Anwar, the ODI great. And whenever we talk about ODI cricket, his name is one of the first ones that comes up when we're talking about batters. But in Test cricket, I don't think he's talked about enough. And no other Pakistani opener averages 45.5 in Test cricket.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think Saeed Anwar is obviously one of the great players of all time. I think it's a pity that during his career there was no T20 cricket because if there was, he'd probably be one of the first picks. Probably make a ton of money playing in the PSL and other leagues around the world. But yeah, he was a great Test player. Some of the innings that he played in England, the 176. He played a great innings in Adelaide against some really, really great Australian bowling attacks. And I believe he was also in Shane Warne's, one of the best players that Shane Warne ever bowled to. So he was a great player. He was ahead of his time. He used to play real positive cricket, irrespective of the format, irrespective of the opposition. And he did things that were just amazing. And, when you watched him play, you could see how special he was. I remember, you always go back to that one inning of 194. I think so many people watched that because it was the first game Pakistan played against India after losing that Bangalore match in 1996. And, obviously he took the Indian bowlers to the cleaners and it was just an amazing thing to watch. It's important I think, to bring him up obviously in the conversation of, one of the best test openers Pakistan's ever had.
I mean, absolutely. I would agree with both of you. My number one was Saeed Anwar as well. I remember something that when I was growing up, I had this, I wouldn't say it's a stat, it's just a memory that of Saeed Anwar's 194. Obviously, I didn't watch it live, but when I was growing up, my dad used to tell me, you know what, we hold 2 world records at the moment. And I'm like, okay, which ones? He said, what, the 194, the highest ODI score by any cricketer, any Pakistani batsman, any batsman actually. My bad. And then there was another one, which was for the fastest 100, which was by, Shahid Afridi. So these are my earliest memories that I have of, Pakistan cricket. So absolutely, Saeed Anwar, his average is amazing. He's got, what, 1100s in tests, which I don't think that justifies or that reflects the kind of player that he was. I wish he would have played longer. I wish he would have played more cricket. But yes, absolutely. Number one is Saeed Anwar, so we're not going to have any arguments here about that.
Yeah, I want to add two things about Saeed Anwar. I think Hijab made some good points. Number one, he didn't play enough, right? He wasn't part of the 92 World Cup team, or I think he was injured, and he didn't play. Obviously, that team would have been better if he was in it. And just the longevity of his career, right? Like, he should have played 100 test matches. And I think if you look back at the history of Pakistan cricket, over and over and over, we see all these great players, guys like Saeed Anwar, Muhammad Asif, Muhammad Amir, a ton of guys that were super, super talented and great, but we didn't see them over the course of 100 test matches, over the course of, he did play a lot of one-day games, but definitely on the test side, probably didn't play enough. But there's no doubt that he's the best player, one of the best openers. I think Hanif, I would say, is better than him. But yeah, he's probably in the top two for me. But I'll let you kind of lead that.
Perfect. And yeah, Hijab 1100s in 55 test matches is 100 every 5 test matches. So that's quite a good statistic and the highest average for a Pakistani opener. And you mentioned his 194 in Madras. Well, I have an early memory of Saeed Anwar as well. Of course, I caught him in the wee end of his career, but that 100 against India in the 2003 World Cup, which ended in defeat for Pakistan, that is the only Saeed Anwar 100 I've actually watched live. So I mean, I pity myself for that because he is one of Pakistan's all-time greats. But I think it's fair to say that we've all agreed on Saeed Anwar occupying that number one position. Does he have all three of our votes?
Yes.
I would just interject and say that, and I guess we're going to get to him at some point, but I would pick Hanif ahead of him because I think Hanif is the one who was a trailblazer in Pakistan's batting legacy. He's the one who started it all. He's probably, if you read, people who've written about him, obviously none of us have seen him, but I think Usman Samiuddin talks about him in his book, The Unquiet Ones, in a way that, we don't really talk about any other batsman. So he was the beginning of Pakistan's batting legacy. In my opinion, he should be ahead of Saeed Anwar as the first person that we should talk about. But we can disagree. That's the whole point of this.
Well, we are moving on to debate position number 2, and Hanif Muhammad is one of the first names that comes up. You rightly pointed that out, Ali. An average of 43.98 in also 55 tests, which is quite uncanny. And of course, the longest test innings of all time, 970 minutes in Bridgetown, Barbados. His innings of 337, the original Little Master and the original Wall, I'd like to add. And of course, he makes a solid case. And what I actually found very interesting in Hanif's stats was that he averaged 45.29 in Asia. But in the West Indies, of course, as you would imagine, he averaged close to 70. And then in Australia and New Zealand, he averages 55.85, which I think does really strengthen his case. Would you like to add anything to that, Hijab?
No, you're absolutely right about that. Obviously, we didn't have the privilege of watching him live, but always heard these stories of a legend, the trailblazer in the Pakistani cricket. And then obviously, when it comes to openers, we have this legacy of kind of struggling with openers, right? So it's a position that's a bit hard to pick from, but Hanif Muhammad definitely, Little Master, makes the cut. Whenever you talk about Pakistani openers, that's the first name that comes to your mind, right? So, yep, absolutely agree with you over there.
Okay, just before we move on to number 3, I just want to throw a curveball over here, a potential candidate for the second opener spot. And why I propose this is to add some depth in the bowling. You guys are probably going to laugh at me, slander me, and question my credibility to be on this panel. But I'm going to name Shahid Afridi. Surprisingly, 36.51 average with the bat in Test cricket, albeit a small sample size of 27 tests. And that average is inflated courtesy of his performances versus India and the West Indies in particular. But given that Pakistan has such a rich history of middle order batsmen, I thought maybe if we can slot in an all-rounder in the opening position and someone like Afridi, who is the maddest max of them all, I'm basically taking a punt with Afridi up top because I have enough people below. So I just want to know your thoughts. Of course, I know that it is a bit radical to propose Afridi in a Test 11 of all places, but just want to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I can take this one on Afridi. I agree with you. I think the Afridi that was developing in the late 90s and the one that scored the 145 against India in a Test match, that guy he's a pretty special player, right? Shahid Afridi is considered a superstar. He probably didn't perform like a superstar, as consistently as he needed to. But if you watch the games when Javid Miyada was the coach and Afridi was kind of developing as a Test batsman, you could see kind of the framework of a really talented, capable Test batsman who did something completely different, right? Kind of what Brinder Sehwag did, but almost like at a different level. But I think obviously in front of Hanif and Saeed Anwar and some of the other ones, Shoaib Muhammad, Sadiq Muhammad, some of these guys, I don't think Shahid Afridi gets ahead of them. Also, I think the best version of Shahid Afridi's batting as an opener, he probably wasn't there as a test leg spinner at that point. And so, by the time the Afridi became a really good leg spinner, he wasn't that good of a batsman anymore, or he had stopped trying as a batsman. But I think it's a great punt. I think another one would be Mudassir Nazar, who was also kind of this medium pacer kind of wall that opened the batting. He was kind of this makeshift opener. But if you're trying to make a great Test 11, I don't think that either of those guys would get in there.
Your take, Hijab?
I mean, if you talk about all-time 11, I wouldn't really put Shahid Afridi in there because we're talking all-time greats. So for a small period of time, there was an era where he came and he conquered, and we all are aware of that. He showed us a different batting style, a different opening style in test matches, which was a bit more risky than everybody else that was doing at that point in time. But if you talk about like all-time, it's a bit of a stretch in my opinion. I would definitely go with Saeed Anwar and Hanif Muhammad, the first two choices. But it's actually a good point that you raised, Behram. I like this. I like that you're throwing curveballs at me.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I also know it's a bit absurd to throw Shahid Afridi's name out there in an all-time Test 11, but I just thought I'd make things interesting because as we go on in this 11, we'll realize that bowling depth could be a bit of an issue. So the only reason why I proposed Afridi's name was because of that. But I think, Ali, you make a fair point that at Test level, he didn't quite cut it because he retired in 2010, I believe, when he was captain on that tour of England. And we saw the best of Shahid Afridi in limited overs cricket as a bowler from like 2009 to 2014-ish.
I think we should do a podcast on Pakistan's best theoretical 11. I think Shahid Afridi would definitely make a lot of this.
Yeah. But anyway, I think we're all set on Saeed Anwar and Hanif Muhammad opening the batting for this all-time Test 11.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. I think it's worth adding a couple of names into the conversation, certainly as worthy considerations. Majid Khan was a great opener, batted at number 3 a lot as well. Sadiq Muhammad, who's also the brother of Hanif Muhammad, was another really great opener, as was Shoaib Muhammad. We have to put in the context some of the great openers that Pakistan had, after Saeed Anwar and Hanif Muhammad, or in and around the same era. Obviously, all those guys were incredibly great, but there's no doubt that Hanif and Saeed, at least for me, and I guess you guys as well, was the one that stood out.
Perfect. And moving on to position number 3, I'm going to throw a name over there, which is arguably the most decorated batter in the history of Pakistan cricket. An average of 52.05 across 118 test matches. The only Pakistani test batter to cross that 10,000 run barrier in test cricket. He has 34 hundreds as well, which is the highest for any Pakistani in test cricket. And I think what strikes me most about this player is his record of scoring 100 in every single test playing nation that he played versus every single team. Of course, you guys have probably guessed who I'm talking about. It's Yunus Khan. What do you guys have to say about Pakistan's finest?
So obviously that was my obvious choice as well. Yunus Khan, the only Pakistani batsman to achieve that 10,000 runs milestone, and looking good while doing it. Do you know what I mean? He looked so good when he played. He knew how to assess every situation. He knew how to build partnerships. Those triple hundreds that he's got, he was just overall phenomenal. I mean, if you talk about all-time greats, you can never ever leave Yunus Khan out of your team. I don't care if you're talking about if you have like 10 other players with that position to fill, but you can never leave out Yunus Khan because he's in a league of his own.
I agree, and it was a test career that spanned 17 years. It's a shame that he only got to play 118 test matches, and of course you mentioned his triple hundred. And I'd like to mention that Pakistan's ascent to the number 1 ranking in test cricket, which happened around 2016, albeit for a few weeks, was primarily due to Yunus Khan and Misbah-ul Haq. I think Yunus was the mainstay in Pakistan's batting at the time, and without Yunus's services, I don't think Pakistan could have accomplished that feat.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think Yunus Khan has to be, the choice for number 3 batsman. It's a position that Pakistan has historically struggled in. Not really had any, really great, number 3 batsmen, world class. And I think Yunus Khan developed into that. And I think the thing that's interesting about Yunus's career is that he didn't have a great start to his career in that, yes, he scored runs early on, but he would struggle in one days and get dropped in tests, or, vice versa. Yunus was playing and batting at number 3, didn't score any runs. I believe he got ducks in both innings. I might be wrong about that, but he scored it was very low scores. And then in Calcutta, he comes in and he scores 267, and boom, he explodes as a test batsman. And he has this, great run for over a decade as a mainstay at number 3, number 4 for Pakistan, and just a great batsman. I think the one kind of demerit that I would give him is that he probably didn't perform to the level in one-day cricket as he probably should have. Obviously, this is not a conversation about that, but as a test batsman, he's up there with all his peers, guys like Kumar Sangakkara, Jayawardene, Ricky Ponting, on that, in that period of 10 years, Rahul Dravid, etc. He's there, and I think, the appetite for runs that he had was just almost abnormal, right? I mean, if you look at Inzamam, you look at Muhammad Yusuf, I think in modern day cricket, specifically in one-day cricket, you look at Babar, there's like this appetite for runs. Yunus had that in Test cricket, and it was really fun to watch. I think the one last point that I would have is that towards the end of Yunus's career, it was obvious that his hand-eye coordination was not the same. And the best reflection of that was his strike rate against fast bowlers. It was lower, but he was great at surviving against the fast bowler and then feasting off of the spinners. It was amazing how he was able to kind of adjust throughout his career in different phases of his career. And I think he was a special batsman. And no doubt, I vote for him at number 3.
Yeah, I mean, even though Yunus batted a lot at number 4, but he has batted at number 3. He has had success in both positions. And you mentioned a lot of names in that era. Of course, Rahul Dravid, Jacques Kallis, Sachin Tendulkar, Ricky Ponting. The list goes on and on, Brian Lara. But Yunus's name doesn't quite come up there. And I think he's a bit underrated when it comes to that, because this was a guy, as you said, Ali, had a massive appetite for runs. He could really grind it out. He didn't have a huge range of shots. He just had his go-to shots played straight really well. And of course, I think one of the best sweepers the game has ever seen. But I think Yunus on the grand stage is a bit underrated when it comes to all-time Test grade batsmen.
Yeah, no doubt. I think he's definitely underrated. He's not someone that comes up enough. But he was a super batsman. I think another thing that's underrated about Yunus, and if you're building a Test 11, one of the most important positions is a fielding position called slip. And he's an excellent slip fielder. His hands were the size of buckets. He was so good in that position, and he was just really the total Test package and developed into arguably one of Pakistan's best batsmen. Obviously, we can have that argument, but he's definitely up there.
Love the bit where you talk about his slip fielding. You want to add anything to this, Hijab?
No, I think I agree with that. All of what Ali said, and absolutely, I do feel like Yunus Khan is a bit underrated, because when you talk about legends in the middle order, we talk about Ricky Ponting, we talk about a lot of other players worldwide, but Yunus Khan's name hardly ever comes up. So he is a bit underrated. But if we take out his contribution, let's just assume that Yunus Khan wasn't there. If you take out his contribution from the last decade from Pakistan Test cricket, you can actually see how big of an impact he actually had. So yeah, highly underrated, but he is one of the greats of Pakistan cricket, and he's definitely up there, especially in the Test format.
All right, I think we're dead set on number 3. So it's Saeed Anwar, Hanif Muhammad, and Yunus Khan. That's how this all-time Test 11 is shaping up. All right, coming to the number 4 position. I know a lot of people would be hoping that we take Babar Azam's name, but I think his Test career is still in its infancy, and there's a long way to go for Babar, and he still averages a touch under 50 as well. So I'd want him to cross that barrier as well. But the name I have for number 4 is Sir Mohammad Yusuf. Of course, 7,500 runs in just 90 Test matches at an average of 52.29, which is a phenomenal record. And he was just so elegant. People talk about how aesthetically pleasing Babar Azam is to watch, but I think Mohammad Yusuf's cover drive was just as good, if not better. And then, of course, that calendar year, 2006, 1,788 runs in just 11 Test matches. Joe Root had the opportunity last year to break that record and played so much more in Test cricket. I think he played like 16, 17 Tests, but even he fell short. So that really makes you wonder if Yusuf's record is there for eternity. What do you guys have to say about one of Pakistan's finest middle order batsmen?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I probably would disagree on the pick, but there's no doubt about Muhammad Yusuf's greatness. He was phenomenal. He was one of my favorite players to watch growing up. Somebody who I tried to copy. Obviously, I miserably failed. But that year 2006 was just phenomenal. It was just like he was a run machine. If you look at that Test series that they had in England, where I believe they lost 3-1. Obviously, the Oval controversy. He carried Pakistan's batting in that series, and he was just this. He was unbelievable. I think the one negative I would say about Yusuf is that sometimes, or at least I got this impression, I don't know what the stats say, but was that he wasn't very good under pressure. He didn't lift Pakistan a lot out of pressure situations. It was usually kind of in partnership with Yunus or in partnership with Inzamam. But there's no doubt, I mean, that the record speaks to itself. I mean, he's one of the great batsmen to have ever played the game, not only for Pakistan, but in world cricket. And, sometimes even, today in modern day, when we think about, watching cricket, watching the beauty of cricket, we don't see it as much. We see it in Babar Azam, but there's not a lot of Babar Azams out there. Babar, Virat, guys like that. But Yusuf was definitely one of those guys that you just stopped and watched him play. Him coming down the wicket, hitting sixes over the top on spinners. The cover drive, as you talked about, the flicks behind, point behind the keeper as well. Just a phenomenal cricketer. And again, he was, as we said with Saeed Anwar, I think it needs to be said. After 2006, he didn't play a lot of Test cricket, right? I mean, it was a really big disappointment that we missed out. You never had an opportunity to kind of build off of that 2006 season and really compile the runs and compile the centuries. It was really disappointing, but again, a great cricketer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with both of you. Mohammad Yusuf is not my pick, but he is an absolute legend. Very easy on the eyes, a guy who can basically take you out of any kind of difficult situation. And obviously, the 2006, I actually saw that. I actually saw cricket that year live, so I do remember some of it, it was a fairy tale run, wasn't it? It was just unbelievable. Like, it's a record that I really believe it's going to take a very, very long time for somebody to break that record. Joe Root obviously came close to that, but he didn't get over the line. So yeah, absolutely. Mohammad Yusuf is a very, very pleasant cricketer to watch. His cover drives, I mean, before Babar Azam, obviously. But he's not my pick, though, and I have a reason for that. So my pick for position 4 is going to be Misbah Haq. And the reason for that is that Misbah might not be big on runs, on those numbers, on those stats, but I just felt like he was very key for Pakistani batting order when we needed him. He was a man that came to Pakistani team when we were in crisis. And every single time that Pakistan was in trouble, you could just trust Misbah to get you out of that situation. And you know what? 90% of the time he actually did. I don't know. I just have this image of Misbah Haq having a huge impact. It was for a short period of time, but the impact that he had on our Test cricket was huge. He changed our approach towards Test cricket. And I just believe that he just has a bit of a more impact on Test cricket as the number 4 batsman than Mohammad Yusuf. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
Very interesting pick, Hijab. Of course, you're adding a bit of spice to this podcast. And I think I have to agree with you over there that when it comes to a crisis situation, Misbah Haq was Pakistan's go-to man, and he's dug Pakistan out of a hole so many times. And I think when it comes to captaincy, I think he should be specifically praised for that, because he came in at a time where the spot fixing controversy had just come in. And then he took that team, which wasn't playing at home, playing their home cricket in the UAE, to the number 1 ranking over a period of about 6-7 years, which I think is phenomenal. But I think I just have to tip Yusuf over Misbah over here, because I think Yusuf was a better rotator of strike. Of course, he was a more elegant batsman as well, but I'm not discrediting Misbah here. Yusuf just makes it for me ahead of him in this all-time 11. What about you, Ali?
Well, I disagree with both of you. I think Javid Miyada has to be in that number 4 position. He was Pakistan's best batsman, Pakistan's best era of Test cricket in the 80s, carried Pakistan's batting in all formats, was an absolute legend. He carried the legacy of Hanif Muhammad forward, batted when wickets were far more difficult in an era of great batsmen like Viv Richards, like great bowlers in the West Indies. I know there's a little bit of controversy or negativity around his record against West Indies, but eventually in the last tour to West Indies, I believe Javid Miyada scored 200 on that tour, that series that Pakistan drew. Maybe his record doesn't, stack up to Mohammad Yusuf's, but I think he was a better batsman. He was Pakistan's man in crisis so many times. At least in my opinion, you can't build an all-time Test 11 without Javid Miyada. Great fielder, great tactician, arguably one of the best vice captains in history. I don't know what Imran Khan has to say about that, but at least from a tactical perspective, he has to be there. Great runner between wickets. In my opinion, he has to be there at number 4 for Pakistan. But Mohammad Yusuf is a great pick. I mean, I love Mohammad Yusuf. On Misbah, I would say that I think Misbah, I'm a critic of Misbah, but I think the great thing about Misbah, and I think it needs to be said over and over again, where so many cricketers would have quit, would have stopped playing cricket, would have just gone into the shadows. He just kept scoring runs in domestic cricket, kept his fitness. There's so many guys in Pakistan that cry about not getting an opportunity to play. And then when you go and look at their bodies and you go and look at the work that they're putting in, you don't see it. Misbah was not that person. Again, I would say I'm a critic of Misbah's because I think he could have done even more. I think he had more talent. But the fact that he stuck with it, became Pakistan's captain, scored runs at the international level, yes, was the captain of the team that became the number 1 Test team in the world. I think he has to be considered, he has to be talked about. But I think the class of Yusuf, the class of Javid Miyada is a different level.
Yeah, I agree. And you've put us in a bit of a pickle over here, Ali, because we're at an impasse now. We all have different picks for number four. So maybe we can come back to this. And of course, you spoke about Javed Miyadad. He is arguably the greatest batsman Pakistan has ever produced in Test cricket. At least that's what people who've seen him live say. And he has the numbers to back it up, an average of 52.57 across 124 Test matches, over 8,800 test runs. And an interesting fun fact about Javed Miyadad is that his test average never dropped below 50, which I think is an amazing record to have. And then also, contrary to what many people might think, Javed actually averaged 50 plus in Australia and New Zealand, which I think says a lot about his batsmanship. And of course, he makes my team as well. I just had him slotted in there at number 5. That was the only difference. But yeah, I'd like to know, Hijab, your thoughts on Javed Miyadad.
Oh, absolutely. Like you just said, he is the best. He is the best batsman Pakistan has ever produced. If you go outside of Pakistan and you ask, probably to a cricketing nation, and you ask someone, who do you recognize as Pakistan's, most famous or most successful batsman? There's only one name that comes to their mind, and that's Javed Miyadad. Especially if you ask Indians, that's what they're gonna say. I actually had him at number 5 as well. So, so so we can agree to disagree here. I think that I'm just obviously never saw him live, but from what I've seen, I just thought that he might be a better fit for position number 5. That's it.
Yeah, and of course, we all hear that he was really street smart. He had a great appetite for picking out the gap, and his running between the wickets was fantastic. An amazing rotator of strike, a very shrewd cricketing brain, which Ali, of course, alluded to when he said that he might have been a better captain than Imran Khan, of course. And then also,
Only tactically, not from a leadership perspective, maybe.
yeah, fair enough. And then also, I'd like to add that he was just such a menace on the field. That's what all of his colleagues say, that, and even people he played against, that he was just always going at you and trying to ruffle your feathers. And I think that also adds to his greatness, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, the presence of a cricketer on the field matters as much as their performance does. And he had such a huge impact in the 92 World Cup. And then obviously before that as well, in this, that historic Sharjah, Cup, who can forget that match? So obviously he has a huge, huge impact on our team. So he definitely makes the cut for all-time Pakistan 11. I think it would be a little short of blasphemous if we didn't include him there.
Yeah, I think one thing that we should also talk about with Javed Miyadad is that Pakistan was a losing team in the 70s, right? Pakistan had a lot of great players, but they would lose all the time. And it took Javed Miyadad and Imran Khan to flip that. And that 6 that Miyadad hit off the last ball off of Chetan Sharma really changed the narrative of Pakistan cricket. Pakistan cricket was a losing team with good players, and now they finally became a winning team. And from there, obviously, we saw Pakistan dominate India pretty much everywhere, whether it was in India, in Pakistan, obviously not maybe in World Cups, but pretty much everywhere Pakistan played them in any format, they would dominate them. Me, that was a big reason for that. Him and Imran, not only did they have an appetite to be great players in whatever field that they were in, whether they were batsmen or bowlers, but they had this appetite to win for Pakistan, which some of the players in the 70s maybe didn't have that, or some of the players before them. They were the ones who really carried that legacy forward for Pakistan cricket. And I think Miyadad was a huge part of that. He was someone who was desperate to win, and we should definitely acknowledge that, because I think that's important, right? The stats are important, data is important, but winning is the most important thing. And I think both of those guys were at the forefront of that.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, Ali. It's with respect to changing the mentality of Pakistan cricket and making them into the almost their team to winners. And then they did go on to win the 92 World Cup and won a bunch of ODI trophies prior to that as well. It was a build up of all of that that led to 92. That's at least what the players from that era say. So before we vote on Javed, I think we should also just discuss number 6 as well.
I actually disagree with the number 5. So I would have had, obviously we can do it whatever way you want, but I would have had Javed at 4. I think Inzamam has to be the number 5. I think you can't have this conversation without Inzamam. He's arguably one of Pakistan's greatest Test batsmen. I would definitely put him with Miyadad as probably one of the best. And I think for me, I would give the vote to Inzamam. I'm going to be outvoted here, but I think Inzamam has to be the guy.
Well, I think I can accommodate you, Ali, because my pick for number 6 was Inzi. And now the reason why I have him at number 6, and I know that kind of shortens our bowling attack, which is why I had that Afridi thought earlier. But why I have Inzi at 6 is because I want him to go out and play his one-day game. If, of course, Pakistan is in a crisis, he can save Pakistan. But if they're not in a crisis, he can just go out all guns blazing and attack the spinners and kind of give that much needed impetus to Pakistan late in the innings. Of course, an average of 49.6 in 120 tests, which funnily enough would have been 50.16 if he hadn't played that lone test match for the World 11, because in 119 test matches for Pakistan, he does average 50.16, and just a match winner, natural born match winner, and such a behemoth of a cricketer, a behemoth of a batsman on the crease that bowlers actually feared bowling to Inzamam. And at the peak of his powers, you could just guarantee a score of 50 from Inzi.
Yeah, one of my favorite Inzamam innings is in his 100th Test match. I go back to that tour of Pakistan versus India because in 2005, because I think Pakistan was considered to be a very weak team, and historically Pakistan was a team that was full of fast bowlers, and that's how we win games. But that team was actually full of really good batsmen, right? They had Yunus Khan, that Yusuf, that Inzamam. They had Asim Kamal was there as well, who was a really good batsman during that period. And Inzamam came in, I think it was his 100th Test match. He scored 183. I think Pakistan at the time when he came into bat was 10 for 2 or 10 for 3, something like that.
Yeah,
And
it actually was that same test match, that Bangalore test, which was actually the third test of that series. And it's the same test in which Yunus got that 269, and Pakistan actually went on to draw that series in India 1-1.
Exactly. And I remember in the first test match before the last day, because India was winning, Kamran Akmal scored 100 to save that test match. And I remember Sunil Gavaskar saying this is the weakest Pakistan team to ever come to India. And it was really Inzamam, Yusuf, Yunus really carried the batting in that series. And I think Inzamam was that type of player, right? He was this colossus of a batsman who carried Pakistan's batting for almost 2 decades.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Inzamam ul Haq has to be there. Now I would say this. I had my number 5 position. I was a bit, dilly-dally over that. So I had Inzamam / Javid Miyada. The reason for that is obviously I've seen Inzamam live. I have seen him playing test matches, and I have seen the kind of impact that he had. Wasn't a brilliant rotator of the strike, but apart from that, everything else was just brilliant. And the kind of batsman that he was, and the kind of impact that he had on other batsmen as well in the team, that's what really gets me going. Because if you hear other people, especially Mohammad Yusuf and Yunus Khan, talking about Inzamam ul Haq, they're going to tell you how much of an impact Inzamam had on their careers as well. So that's something that I believe is a huge thing. And then obviously he was the kind of player who could just take the match away from you on the given day.
Yeah, I think Hijab makes a great point. She makes a great point about Yunus and Yusuf, that Inzamam was the rock behind which these guys developed into these great players, right? Without Inzamam being as great as he was, maybe Yusuf and Yunus don't become as great as they are, right? So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I'd like to concur to that. I think that's a fantastic point. And we often talk about dressing room presence, and I think Inzamam had a big one. Some people would argue that he kind of led the team astray and their focus was off cricket for a bit. Of course, that is a controversial hot take, but I will say that he's been a legend for Pakistan cricket across all formats. He is the leading run scorer for Pakistan across all formats. So that record speaks for itself.
I have another hot take. My hot take is that Inzamam wasn't that bad of a captain.
Yeah, I mean, of course, he has had success in India. That ODI series that Pakistan won 4-2 and drawing the Test series 1-1 against a fantastic Indian side. So you have a solid case over there, Ali. But I think it's time that we pick our number 4, 5, and 6 now. So I had Yusuf, Miyadad, and Inzamam, but I'd like to see what you guys are going with.
So I had structured my team where we had 5 bowlers, and so my number 6 was an all-rounder. So my number 6 was Imran Khan. So I guess the structure of the way that I wanted to build my team was a little bit different. But my number 3 was Yunus. My number 4 was Miyadad. My number 5 was Inzamam. Honorable mentions for Mohammad Yusuf, of course, and then Imran Khan was my number 6 because he was, when you have a true all-rounder within the legacy of or the history of Pakistan cricket, you have to, in my opinion, to build an awesome bowling attack and a really great batting lineup. I think Imran was perfect number 6, right? And every country is looking for that guy, and Pakistan had him. So yeah, that's how I would structure my middle order.
Yeah, I went a little batting heavy. I only had 4 frontline bowlers, and I'm including Imran Khan in those 4 frontline bowlers because he did have an average of 22.81 across 88 tests. What about you, Hijab?
So my number 3, 4, 5 were Yunus, Misbah, and Inzamam / Javid Miyadad. And I also have Imran Khan at number 6. I cannot even imagine anybody else at number 6 in Pakistan all-time 11. I don't think anybody else can. So yeah. So my pick is Yunus, Misbah, and Inzamam.
I think the other reason for Imran Khan at number 6 is that Pakistan has this really great tradition of fast bowling and really good spin bowlers as well. It helps you maybe add another bowler in that 11 as opposed to another batsman, where Pakistan's, again, the tradition of Pakistan cricket is that we have better bowlers and batsmen. And so, yeah, that's one of the reasons why I also picked Imran Khan at number 6.
So let me get this right. All of us have Javid Miyada, so I think it's safe to slot him in at number 4 then. And then all of us also had Inzamam, so he can occupy that number 5 position. I think we're all good with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, then moving forward, of course, to number 6, of course. Next up, I also had Imran Khan, averaged 37.69 with the bat, 22.81 with the ball across 88 tests in a career that spanned 21 years. Arguably Pakistan's greatest test captain as well. And he had 362 wickets, might I add, which is quite a large number, especially in that era. And almost 4,000 runs for Pakistan in test cricket. And when you look at those numbers, I don't think any all rounder in history can quite match that, because he averages over 35 with the bat and under 23 with the ball, which I think is phenomenal. And of course, he has written Pakistan's narrative, is a big part of the legacy of Pakistan cricket. And I don't think anyone can not include Imran Khan in their all time Test 11 for Pakistan.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, Imran has to be Imran. I'm not on a first name basis with Imran Khan, but I think Imran Khan obviously has to be, in my opinion, if you're doing a draft of Pakistani cricketers, he probably has to be the first pick. First of all, he's one of the great leaders that Pakistan cricket's ever had. There's other captains that were very good, Mushtaq Muhammad, Abdul Hafiz Kardar, but Imran obviously stands out. He's furthered his legacy as a leader. Obviously, you can disagree with it politically, but building a hospital, building a school, all the philanthropic work that he's done. Just an amazing leader. He's the first person that, again, we talked about it a little earlier. He really was the one who flipped Pakistan from this colonial mindset to one that was winning, that, hey, we as Pakistanis, yes, we may be poor, we may be whatever, but we're here to compete with you. We're here to compete against you. And he did that against the West Indies, against India, against England. The Ian Botham case, which is a legal case, is an example of that, right? That we're not afraid of you. And I think Imran Khan brought that. He was a tremendous bowler. The 82-83 series against India, the series against Australia, the series against West Indies. I mean, he was at the forefront. Some of his bowling exploits were amazing. I think Behram, you obviously shared the statistics, just phenomenal. And as a batsman, he probably performed a little bit below how good he was. But I think one of the great things about Imran Khan that I think it needs to be mentioned, he developed himself into this as a cricketer, right? When he first came on as a bowler, he says this all the time. I mean, we've heard him say it a million times probably. He was like this medium pacer, and he just wanted to be a fast bowler. He transformed his body to be a fast bowler, and he did it, right? He transformed himself to be a batsman, and he did it. He was a captain when Pakistan won the World Cup, but I think his contribution is far more than just winning that World Cup. And I think, he is arguably one of the best all-rounders. He has to be top 2 or 3 best all-rounders in the history of cricket, and I think there's nothing more to be said.
Yeah, I mean, I can go on and on about Imran Khan, to be honest. This could take hours. But when it comes to Imran Khan, I don't really look at stats. And the reason for that is that it's more about his grit, his determination, and that flip that Ali's talking about, going from a team of good players, but not winning, to a team that is consistent, that goes for the win, that never actually thinks about losing. And that's what Imran Khan says a lot of time, that you never think about losing. Whenever you're on the field, you think about winning. And that was the mindset that Pakistani team needed, Pakistani cricket needed. And to be honest, we are still looking, if you're talking about current Pakistan team, we're still looking for a replacement of Imran Khan. How long has it been since he retired? We're still looking for a replacement. We have not been able to find anybody who can match him or his, caliber when it comes to the all-rounders. And his test, his contribution to the test format is a lot more than ODI. I know the world knows him as the captain who won Pakistan a World Cup, but I just believe that his contribution to the test format was a lot more than it was for the ODIs. And his impact was just huge. It was so huge. It was so huge that he's now, one of the most influential people in the world. And obviously his post-cricket, career has an impact on that, but he's still known as one of the best cricketers of all time.
Hijab brings up some great points. I think it has to be said, and I think this is both a point about cricket, but also just about what's happening in the world, and that is Imran Khan he was a cricketer who ended up being one of the most important people in Pakistan's history. Like when we think about 20 years from now, 30 years from now, who are the most influential people in Pakistan's history? He's up there. He's in the top 5, top 10. You don't have to like him, but he's definitely up there. And it all just started as a cricketer, and he became the captain of a cricket team. Just going back a little bit, just one point I want to make was, if you look at the 87 World Cup, that was a really good Pakistan team. and Pakistan lost to Australia in the semi-final of that World Cup. And I know we're talking about Test cricket. And Imran and Javid Miyada were at the crease. Both of them got out in important times during a chase. That was the pinnacle. They didn't make it. They lost. And 5 years later, in '92, with a lesser team, Pakistan wasn't a good team. Imran was diminished. He wasn't a great player anymore. He literally willed that team to a World Cup. And I know we talked about this over and over, but the ability to kind of come off the mat to have lost and then build yourself back up and to win is just unbelievable. The resilience, right? And I think he is kind of the epitome of resilience.
Yeah, some phenomenal points brought up by both of you. The only thing I think I can add to that is the fact that he actually had to remodel his action later on in his career, which I think is a really difficult thing to do. And to go on and be successful, and just how successful he was, I think that really is the epitome of Imran Khan. He never gives up, whether that be on a cricket field or outside of it. And really, like you guys mentioned, he is definitely going to go down as one of the most influential people in Pakistan history. So I think we're all dead set on Imran Khan for number 6, and I think we all have him captaining this side as well. Moving to number 7, the wicket keeper slot. Now, I know he's only played 22 test matches, guys, but he is the only Pakistan wicketkeeper to average above 40 in test cricket. And he's got runs overseas. He's got runs in England, New Zealand, and Australia in test cricket. Pakistan's Mr. Reliable these days with the bat in hand, Mohammad Rizwan. What do you guys say?
So I love Rizwan. I mean, I met him a couple of times as well, and he's a phenomenal guy. He probably came into the team a little bit later, but that seems to be kind of part of the history of Pakistan cricket. Sarfaraz probably should have been Pakistan's wicketkeeper long before he became Pakistan's wicketkeeper, for example. And I think Rizwan kind of follows that tradition. He's a phenomenal player, right? Rizwan is probably one of the most athletic players Pakistan's ever had. And he's great behind the stumps. His range, his ability to get to balls as a wicketkeeper is phenomenal. He's very good standing up as well. And obviously he's a good batsman. I think the thing with Rizwan though is that his career has been really short, right? So the great innings maybe that we don't really remember any of that because he's just still developing his career, which is probably why I didn't have him here. I mean, I completely support it, and I'd probably vote for it if someone put a gun to my head. But I actually had kind of these separate points. One was they're batting wicket keepers, and then there are specialist wicket keepers. And so if you really care about the specialist wicketkeeper role, then we have to mention Rashid Latif, we have to mention Waseem Badi, right? Because those guys were phenomenal behind the stumps. But if we're talking about batsmen, then I kind of put Kamran Akmal there because I think that period, and I know this is super controversial. I know a lot of people don't like Kamran, but like that 2003 to 2006 period where Kamran Akmal was pretty good. He was so good coming in at that number 7 position and playing this counter-attacking innings, right? I don't think any of Pakistan's players, wicketkeepers, have been able to do that. I know Sarfraz played a really great innings against Sri Lanka and was very good at it. But I think Kamran was really good at it. The innings that he played in Karachi in 2006 were, Pakistan were 0 for 3. Pakistan go on to win that test match only because of Kamran. The 100 that he hit in Karachi against India on a very difficult track, just phenomenal. The 100 against India when they drawed, I think it was in Madras, I'm not sure where it was, in 2005, just phenomenal. And I think he kind of has my vote. I know he's very, very unpopular, but I think I might vote for him.
Yeah, I'd just like to interject in a job, then you can have the floor. I do agree, Ali, that those few knocks versus India, where he absolutely dug Pakistan out of a trench, I wouldn't even say a hole, it was a trench. That's how deep it was. I respect Kamran Akmal a lot for those innings, and Pakistan would not have won those test matches if not for his contribution. But solely because of that Sydney test, I cannot vote for Kamran Akmal. I'm sorry. And if not Rizwan, actually, I think Sarfraz Ahmed is a decent shout for this position. He averages 36.39 in 49 test matches, average of 50 in Asia. And in 2014, he averaged 67.54, following it up with 51.55 in 2015. Now, in this period, he scored important hundreds versus Australia, New Zealand, and Sri Lanka. He was really, really good. And even though his peak lasted not too long, I had him in the situation where Rizwan isn't picked, but I'd still say that 22 test matches for Mohammad Rizwan is enough. And then those overseas runs, that 100 versus South Africa in Pindi, I think it was, and then this recent 100 versus Australia in the Karachi test that Pakistan managed to draw. I think he's the sort of player who rises to the occasion in pressure situations, and that's why I had Rizwan in there.
Right. Look, I'm all for Mohammad Rizwan, okay? He's, I believe, the most adorable cricketer I've ever seen on my screen. But if you're not going to let me have Babar in this team, I'm not going to let you have Rizwan. Because it's the same rule applies, They haven't played that long. The sample size is too small. So in my opinion, I would actually have Sarfraz Ahmed in my playing 11. Reason for that is because during that period after 2011 to 2015, when Pakistan was playing Test cricket, we had Sarfraz Ahmed as our specialist wicketkeeper. That was the time that I watched Test cricket religiously as well. So I just believe that he was probably the best that we had when it comes to this format. I'm not talking about the other formats, just the Test format. I think he's the best we have. You can argue that Kamran Akmal had a bit more impactful performances than him, but I just believe as a character, he had a huge impact on the game as well. He went on to later captain the team as well. His performances during 2014, 2013 against Sri Lanka, Australia, they were just too good to not have him in your all-time playing 11. So I do believe that for me, it's going to be Sarfraz over Rizwan, but that will change very, very quickly, I believe.
Yeah, no, I definitely do agree with the idea that Rizwan, when it's all said and done, Rizwan will be there. I think an argument can also be made for Moin Khan, because I think Moin Khan was this kind of street fighter, was really the ideal number 7, wicketkeeper batsman in the 90s, because he would come in and really pull the team out of difficult positions. A real fighter, and he was a really talented batsman. Obviously, he probably didn't reach his full potential, but I think the way we viewed wicketkeepers back then was different. I think Rizwan, though, theoretically is probably the best one that Pakistan will ever have, because of how athletic he is, how great, he's both good defensively as a wicketkeeper, but also as a batsman, right? And I think the best is probably still yet to come. I think great job by Hijab on Sarfraz, because I think Sarfraz, he probably could have been better than he actually was, right? That 36 average probably flatters him. I mean, he probably should be better than that. But I think he played some really great innings, and I think.
So the thing is that the thing I like most about Sarfraz was that he was very different from other players before him. He was very hungry for runs. He was very energetic. He was very animated. And to see that in Test cricket was something that's like kind of unprecedented, especially in Pakistan, because it's considered like a bit more calm, mundane type of a format. But I would say Sarfraz's hunger for runs in Test cricket, that's what puts him on top for me. And obviously, you can just look at him sweeping fast bowlers, man. How can you not have him in your playing 11?
Absolutely, a very busy player, Sarfaraz, and he played the counter-attacking role to perfection during his peak in Test cricket. So, surprise, surprise, viewers! In an interesting turn of events, I believe that Sarfaraz Ahmed has occupied our number 7 spot as Pakistan's wicketkeeper in our all-time Test 11, which I think is fantastic. Moving on to number 8, and I don't think there's going to be any debate over here. We're talking about the Sultan of Swing, Waseem Akram, averaged 23.61 with the ball in 104 test matches, 414 wickets, which speaks for itself, and then also averaged 22.64 with the bat. He has a few hundreds in test cricket, a 257 not out versus Zimbabwe, and I think that is still the innings with most sixes in test cricket, which really is amazing, and perhaps the greatest exponent of reverse swing in the history of cricket. And I'd say many people would say, most people, I think, would say that he's the greatest left-arm pace bowler that cricket has ever seen.
I have nothing to say.
Well, honestly, Behram, you didn't leave much for us to say, to be honest. I mean, there are no arguments. I've also have Waseem Akram on my list, but it's just that I didn't see Waseem Akram on his peak. I saw a little bit of him like during 2003, 2004, like at the very last leg of his career, but there are very few bowlers in the world that would ever come close to the caliber and the quality of Waseem Akram. That's basically all I'll say.
I think the one cool thing about Waseem Akram was that he was able to reinvent himself almost constantly over a 20-year period, where he was like this fast bowler in the 80s with real pace and good bouncer, good at everything. And then in the 90s, he kind of transitioned from having to a lot of pace to kind of less pace, but being more technical. And then towards the back end of his career, obviously you can tell he wasn't as good, but he almost seemed as dangerous, right? He was still really good with lesser pace. And I think he was able to kind of go from one era to the other as his body changed, as he got older, and he was able to adjust and still be as threatening. Where, not to put anyone down, if you guys don't like Waqar was a great bowler, right? But at the end, you can tell that, wait, this isn't Waqar Younis anymore, right? But with Waseem, you never kind of got that sense, right? You never got the sense that this isn't the Waseem from the 80s, even though he wasn't. He was still great. Like, he was still super devastating. He was still dangerous to the opposition, and they definitely worried about him. So he was just phenomenal, one of the great players that we've ever seen. I think it's disappointing because I think the way that cricket is now, there's not a lot of emphasis on the bowlers because the game is, each format is stacked so heavy in favor of that. Maybe not Test cricket as much. And so we don't get to see these like unbelievable colossus type bowlers like Waseem Akram, who could do all these different things with the ball, who could cut the ball, who could swing the ball, who had so much in this bag. Like his bag had just like 50 tricks, right? He could do all these different things, right? And I think it was phenomenal to see him. Obviously, I didn't see him a lot in the 80s. Obviously, we can go back on YouTube and look at those videos. But in the 90s, he was immense, and even in the early 2000s, he was really good.
Well, I think Michael Atherton would say that he is still immense based on that delivery that we saw on Twitter, and he cleaned him up, and that was just brilliant to watch. And yes, I agree, Ali, and both Hijab, I think you brought up great points. And just the longevity of Waseem's career being a fast bowler and how he kept on reinventing himself and stayed relevant and world class, I think that really is a testament to his entire career. And also, a champion at heart. His mentality was cutthroat. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that Waseem Akram is the greatest cricketer Pakistan has ever produced.
Nah, has to be Imran Khan.
I think there are some issues in the Waseem Akram story, so I don't think he can be on there. But he was just one of the greatest bowlers. If you talk about the top 10 bowlers in the history of cricket, he's definitely there. It's phenomenal.
And we can also talk about the impact that he had on future generations. I mean, look at our fast bowling now.
Yeah, right.
Pakistani fast bowling peaked when Waqar and Waseem, were playing. But if you think about it, if you look at it, after they retired, it never actually went downhill, did it? I mean, Pakistani fast bowling has always been good since the, Waqar and Waseem and even Imran Khan era. So it has never actually gone downhill. So that's what I believe is one of the biggest contribution of a cricketer as well, that they inspire a whole other generation to just be like them.
Absolutely. And some of these new guys, they haven't even seen Waseem bowl live. And still, he's an inspiration to them, gets to work with them on an on and off basis in the PSL, and sometimes goes on and has a chat with them. But moving on, because of course we are all in unison with respect to Waseem at number 8. At number 9 is his partner in crime, at least for me, Waqar Younis, an average of 23.56 in 87 test matches, 373 test wickets. And I think what really stands out in all of his statistics is his strike rate. 43.4, one of the best in modern day cricket as well. I think Kagiso Rabada is challenging that strike rate now, and I think Dale Steyn had a very good one as well. And one really interesting stat about Waqar Younis is that in 47 test matches in Asia, he has 215 wickets at 20.64 in Asia. So I think that really puts things into context. And I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it.
Yeah, I think they're just unanimous picks, right? I mean, I actually thought about trying to get Waqar Younis out of this team, but I think there's no real way out for him. I mean, he's definitely there. I think there's an argument to be made for Shoaib Akhtar theoretically, because I think he's almost underrated now. I think we forget how good he was, but I think with Waqar in his pomp, when he was at his best, there was this electricity to watching him bowl that's just unparalleled. And what he could do with the new ball, what he could do with the old ball, there was just this energy. If you think about cricket, right, you're watching a test match, it can be boring, right? But when Waseem and Waqar were bowling, when Shoaib Akhtar was bowling, when Muhammad Asif were bowling, but specifically Waqar, there was this energy. He had this long run up, this brilliant action that he had no choice but to watch it. He definitely has to be there. I think there's a conversation to be had if Waseem, Waqar, and Imran are on the same team, who's bowling first change. Because if you look at Imran's career statistics, he's not very good as a first change bowler. Waseem is definitely not a first change bowler, so that leaves Waqar, right? And it's kind of good because with the old ball, he's really good, specifically the one that is reversing. But yeah, he's definitely there for me as well.
Oh yeah, the toe crusher, the bowler who literally inspired the whole other generation to just bowl Yorkers. That includes a lot of my relatives as well. So yeah, I mean, he was fast, he was accurate, he was very smart, and that long run up, man, that was so aesthetically pleasing. And his bowling action and everything about Waqar Younis just screams class. And I wish I would have born a bit earlier and watched him, at his peak. But it is what it is. But he's definitely at my number 9 as well.
And I think a very important point, which I must mention about Waqar Younis, is how he came back from injuries. Now, he had some career-threatening injuries, and yes, he might not have been the same sort of tear-away quick that he was in the early 90s, but still, he has a very accomplished career for Pakistan, especially in Test cricket and ODI cricket as well. So I think really it's a no-brainer to have the 2 Ws in there, and I think we all agree on that, right?
Yeah, he was also
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And he's also an amazing athlete, right? I think we sometimes view ourselves as Pakistanis as not being athletes, and it's just kind of just because of our system where our best athletes, our best players, they don't get to the top because it's not a meritocracy. But Waqar, Waseem, Imran Khan, these guys were amazing athletes, right? They could probably play any sport. It just happens that cricket is the most popular sport in Pakistan. But when you watch Waqar's run up, it's like a sprinter, and it just again, yeah, I definitely agree on Waqar being there at number 9.
Okay, great. So now we have the first 9 spots sorted, and we're going to go towards number 10 and 11. And just before I initiate that conversation, we're going for an off spinner and a leg spinner, guys. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Right.
All right, perfect. So let's talk leg spinners before. Now we've got 2 candidates over here, in my opinion. 3 if you want to add Danish Kaneria to that. But the 2 that stand out for me are Abdul Qadir and Yasir Shah. They both average in the early 30s with the ball in Test cricket. And Abdul Qadir is really the pioneer of leg spin bowling in Pakistan, at least. And he also inspired Shane Warne. 236 wickets in 67 Test matches. And anyone who's watched Qadir say that he was just a wizard with the ball. And then, of course, Yasir Shah. Maybe outside of Asia, he doesn't have a spectacular record in the Sena countries. I know he has 2 10-fers in England, but barring that, he's been a bit expensive and hasn't really taken any wickets. But he is the fastest bowler to 200 Test wickets in the history of the game. 235 wickets in 46 Test matches. So that has to count for something. And I'm just curious to know, which leg spinner are you guys going with?
Yeah, so I went with Abdul Qadir as my leg spinner. I think the other leg spinner for me that was in the conversation was Mushtaq Ahmad. I know Yasir's stats are really good. I don't really value Yasir the same way. I don't think he's a wizard with the ball. I think you mentioned his statistics within Asia and outside of Asia. I think the longevity factor is not there with him either. I think Qadir is just on another level. I think Danish Canaria, you can mention Danish. I think some of those series within Pakistan in the early 2000s, he was really good. And that bowling attack wasn't that good, right? If you think about it, we remember the matches where we had Shoaib Akhtar and Asif. Those are few and far between. It was really like guys like Rana Naveed, Muhammad Sami,
Shabir Ahmed.
Shabir Ahmed who was actually a good bowler. But it was Danish Canaria bowling 50 overs. And just, that was really hard to do. That is really hard to do. And I think that actually impacted how good he could be as a leg spinner. But I think Abdul Qadir is I definitely can't say that I've watched a lot of Abdul Qadir, but I think it would be, poor shout not to have him in there. He's definitely in there.
So my pick was, so I've got 2. So my pick for the leg spinner was Mushtaq Ahmad and Danish Kaneria. So one of those people, if you can say. Danish Kaneria because I saw him live and I just really loved the guy when he was playing, to be honest. He played, 60 odd tests and he had like more than 250 wickets. I just believe he had a very crucial role to play in that. He played for a short period of time, but he had a very crucial, role to play. So I just feel like he was a bit more impactful. Yasir Shah could be there, but I just don't see him being as impactful as Danish was when he was at his peak. And then obviously Mushtaq Ahmed, he's a legend. So I guess that's my pick for number 10.
Yeah, well, we find ourselves at a crossroads yet again. I think those are very valid points about Danish Kaneria by both of you guys. Ali and Hijab, of course, 261 wickets in 61 Test matches. And incidentally, the 4th highest wicket taker for Pakistan in Test cricket. But I think when it comes down to the vote, I'm leaning towards Abdul Qadir. What about you guys?
Yeah, I agree. It has to be Abdul Qadir.
It's a shame, Hijab. You've been outvoted, but brilliant contributions from you. Which brings us to the final position in our playing 11, the off-spinner position. And I again think there are 2 very good candidates for this. Of course, there is the pioneer of the Dusra, Saqlain Mushtaq, one of Pakistan's greatest off-spinners of all time. Averaged 29.83 with the ball in 49 Test matches, took 208 Test wickets. But my pick for the off-spinner is Saeed Ajmal. 178 wickets in just 35 Test matches, an average of 28.10. 111 wickets off those 178 came outside of the UAE, which I think is a staggering statistic. And then I just like to mention that I picked Saeed Ajmal solely because in the time when he was playing, he was Pakistan's main weapon. He was carrying that bowling attack. And without Saeed Ajmal, Pakistan wouldn't have won very many matches across formats. So I think Saeed Bhai gets the nod from me, and I'd love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, I think that's there's a compelling argument for Saeed Ajmal. I myself pick Saqlain Mushtaq because I think of how great he was against those Indian teams in the late 90s. Going to India, Pakistan doesn't win Test series in India without Saqlain Mushtaq. And considering how good Indian batsmen are against spin, he kind of tied those batsmen in knots. Guys like Sachin, Rahul Dravid, Saurav Ganguly. There are also other really good batsmen on the Indian team, but those are the three big ones. And I think he had 25 wickets in that series. He was just immense, and he was a great bowler. Again, very disappointing that he only played 49 Test matches. I mean, that's not enough, but that's who I voted for. But I think Behram makes a great point about Saeed Ajmal. He was the best bowler on that team, and he kind of carried that team. He was kind of like the Waseem Akram of that team, leading the bowling attack. And so there's an argument to be made with Saeed Ajmal, but I think Safwan was a better bowler.
So my pick is actually Saeed Ajmal. And the reason for that is because science is the man.
Yes.
And the man can do anything, So I just believe that Saeed Ajmal was that kind of bowler that had every single batsman up in knots. They didn't know what he was going to do. They didn't know his next move. They could not anticipate what he was going to do. So it was just, he was a magician. So I watched him live many, many, many times. And I just feel like the era that Saeed Ajmal was in Pakistan Test cricket was one of the golden eras of Pakistan Test cricket, because when we talk about an impact of a spinner, that was huge for Pakistan, especially when we were not playing home cricket, we were playing in UAE. His impact on the England series, his impact on the Australian series, we can all talk about that. We can talk about those low-scoring thrillers and what Saeed Ajmal, did for Pakistan in those low-scoring Test matches. It was, for me, it has to be Saeed Ajmal.
Love it. I'm so glad that Saeed has won this round of voting. And he had Hashim Amla in splits, whether that be the UAE or in South Africa. I think he bowled brilliantly in South Africa, even though Pakistan lost that Test series 3-0. He was our main man, a spinner with the attitude of a fast bowler. And I'm so happy he's made this team. And now we do have our playing 11, and we'll come to that towards the end. Before that, I just want to talk about the 12th man. And given all of the honorable mentions we've had along the way, I think it has to be Mohammad Yusuf.
Well, I'll just share what I had. I actually had Mushtaq Muhammad. I know we didn't really talk about him, but he was one of Pakistan's great captains in the 70s. He was a batsman. I think he averaged 40. He was also a leg spinner, and he was a really good leg spinner. So think about kind of a true all-rounder, what you were kind of trying to talk about with Shahid Afridi. And so I had him, but I'm pretty sure no one is really too excited to talk about him. But that's what I had.
So my 12th man is Babar Azam. You didn't let me pick him in playing 11, so I'm just going to pick him as the 12th man. I just believe that Babar is going to go ahead and break all the records that Pakistani batsmen have worked so hard to make. But he's going to be inshallah, he's going to be Pakistan's most successful batsman from what we can see. And we wish that. So, yeah, I just feel like he should be in there.
You know what? I can get behind that. Babar has my vote as well.
So
I can see a cringe. I can see a cringe on Ali's face where he's like, "Oh my God, what are these kids doing?"
we're not going to have the Mushtaq Muhammad conversation. We'll do a separate podcast. But yeah, I think there's like so many great players, right, that we didn't even mention, right? Mohammad Asif, Shoaib Akhtar,
Azhar Mahmood. I just feel like Azhar Mahmood should be, talked about.
I guess Mudassir Nazar would be ahead of Azhar Mahmood for me in that conversation.
He probably had a better career. I think Azhar was super talented, right? But no one was ever able to unlock him as kind of this really good Test player, right? Like if you look at those innings that he played early on in his career, like he peaked in his first Test match, like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, yep. Fair points over there. But anyway, we have our all-time Pakistan Test team now. All 12 positions have been selected, and our lineup looks much like this. We've got Saeed Anwar and Hanif Muhammad opening the batting. At number 3, we have Pakistan's highest run scorer in Test cricket in Yunus Khan. Number 4 is Javid, Miyada, and number 5 is Inzamam ul Haq. At number 6 is the captain of this all-time Pakistan Test 11, which is Imran Khan. And then at 7, we've got Sarfaraz Ahmed as the wicketkeeper. Waseem and Waqar follow, and the spinners will be Abdul Qadir and Saeed Ajmal. The 12th man being Pakistan's promised son, Babar Azam. And I've had a lot of fun making this 11 with you guys. Thank you so much, both Ali and Hijab, for making it to this podcast. I'm sure the viewers will enjoy it too. And I had a lot of fun in your presence.
Yeah, we had a great time. Thank you, Behram.
Oh, it was a wonderful experience, and I hope we can do this again.
Absolutely, and we will have future episodes of Beyond the Crease as well. And if you have any suggestions for that, leave that in the comment section below. Of course, leave your all-time Test 11s in the comment section below as well. And if you enjoyed this podcast, like it, share it, subscribe to our social media platforms. And yeah, that's a wrap for episode 3. Do catch us for episode 4 soon enough. That's all for now. Goodbye.